Today up on the bench we have a SBE or sideband engineer. This is a Trinidad III. Now, might be from sideband engineers, but this is not a sideband radio. This is an AM only 40 channel radio. This was in pretty rough condition. Customer brought this one to me. It didn't really do anything. And yeah, having previously been a smoker, I would have to say this thing was definitely owned by a chain smoker at some time. I know because I used to be, so I know what that does to stuff the looks. And yeah, it had the film, horribly nasty inside, outside. Oh my God, the chrome, like the knobs, it was brown. Yeah, so. Yeah, it took some serious cleaning, but yeah, that's the least of the concerns. Because if anything, honestly, if there is one good point to tar and nicotine, it does make a good protective coating. But yeah, whoo boy, this thing had some work done to it over the years, and you just touch the radio. After I got a lot of stuff fixed, I finally got to a point where it was working, but you just barely touch the radio, and the receiver would go dead. You'd touch it again, and it would start to work again. And, you'd barely have to touch the damn thing. It's like, and trying to find intermittent problems like that, because anytime you touch anything, it starts to work. Well, you can't fix it if it ain't broke. And someone had, and I'm really not sure what the hell they were doing. This may have had a channel modification at some time, and it's been removed because it's now back to a state. At least it is now. It's the way I received it. It was on the normal 40 channels, but these have a PLL board that actually sits up off of the main chassis. There's a few components down on the underside on the main board, but not a lot. Mainly some capacitors, a bunch of resistors. Not really anything exciting underneath the board there. It's connected through a ribbon cable right here, which was another problem. It did have one broken wire, so I had to cut the end of that off, strip that, and resolder that in. Now, I had to pull that off anyhow to get up on the underside of this board to replace the electrolytic capacitors and to do some other cable repairs, because that was a lot of the problems with this thing was all of these coax cables. There's actually 4 of them. There's one here, here, and here, and then there's another one tucked up on the underside. And they all go through a hole in the circuit board and are soldered to the underside of the main board around here. And then the other ends of these are all soldered to the underside of the PLL board. Yeah, the center conductors on there, somebody had been soldering, desoldered, soldered, resoldered over the years, God knows how many times. And yeah, I don't know what the heck they did, but some of them were just barely hanging on by a thread, and that was one of the problems. Was one of these cables had actually, the tip was broken, but it was making contact. So the tiniest bit of vibration, it would make contact, and the oscillator signal could get through. And then you'd just barely touch the radio again, and it would break contact, and it was, but yeah. So I had to fix all of those. So other than that, I had a full recap. I really didn't need anything else. All the transistors are fine, output power and whatnot. Now the display board, it was kind of dim and wonky. Well, yeah, it definitely needed some parts. So let me reach over here to my little parts pile. You'll notice there's some new resistors here. Those were replaced for a reason. There's also an electrolytic capacitor and a Zener diode on the underside of this board. There's a few additional components. Now, all 3 of these components normally would be on the bottom side of this board. Someone had at some point in time placed this transistor. This is used as a voltage regulator, like somewhere around 5.2 volts or something. That's the voltage for the display. Someone had replaced that and put it on top of the board. Normally, I'd say, yeah, leave the components where the manufacturer put them. In these radios, yeah, I won't say that. You want to put these components on the top side of the board, because the bottom side of this board is black, and it's black for a reason. This shit gets really hot. Now, here's the electrolytic capacitor. That used to be gray. That plastic, you can even see it shrunk. It's gotten so hot over the years. That plastic tube over the aluminum can used to be gray. It's now cooked brownish black. That resistor, yeah, it's completely cooked, cracked. It's just, yeah, it's supposed to be 100 ohm and it measures like around 1K. Now, this one was replaced. This one was perfectly fine, but I wanted to relocate it to the top side of the board, and I wanted to leave the leads a little bit longer so I could leave it up off of the board a little bit, because that's the problem here. These parts get really, really hot. So they run around 160 degrees. Yeah, there's 160.5, 161. Now actually, if you put this on something like channel, let's say 38, I think 38 would have what the most illuminated segments in the display. But when you put even more load on this thing, yeah, it gets even a little bit hotter than that. It's honestly a poor regulation system. It works. It's a Zener diode regulated system. The problem is like I say, the main problem is they just put these resistors, these components that get really hot on the bottom side of the board, and they just end up heat soaking and cooking the circuit board. That's probably the biggest problem is they cook the circuit board and they damage the circuit traces. So now they're on the top side. Heat can do what it does best, rise. It can rise and exit the cabinet now without destroying the circuit board. So another thing, I had to change both of the fuses. So it has one fuse. Hey, over, come on, camera, cooperate here. It has one fuse right here on the board. This is low voltage, so this one's safe to touch. This is after the power supply, so it's already been converted into DC at 13.8 volts, and this is the the protection after the power supply. Someone had, I don't think it was, or was it the wrong? Yeah, it was the wrong current rating too. Yeah, they had a 5 amp, but the biggest problem was, notice the length of this fuse. If I try and hold that there, see how short it is. They it. Yeah, it's the wrong style fuse, so it was barely touching the contacts in there. The other problem was the main fuse. There's one back here right beside the power cord. This is a, what is this? It's a 312, 3AG, yeah, I can see that. It's a 2 amp fuse. So they had a 2 amp fuse in this. It's supposed to have a 1 amp fuse back here on the 120 volt line. So both of those were replaced. Like I say, other than that, clean it up, remove a few decades worth of thick dust that was encrusted in there with all that nicotine and tar. Yeah, the capacitor, you may even be able to see the outline. See that shiny spot? That's how much bigger the original electrolytic capacitor was, and that's another one I did happen to hold out. This is the original. It was a 2200 microfarad at 35 volt. Now, this is a 3300 at 50 volt. So not only a higher voltage rating, which increases the capacitor size, but also a higher microfarad, or a higher capacity. And look at the size difference. Yeah, it's shorter and smaller in diameter. So yeah, capacitors have really shrunk over the years. And they actually use good caps in this, because you can see, get it or not, that's a Nippon Chemicon. So I mean, it's not like it had cheap caps in these radios. There you go. So I mean, it had good high quality Nippon Chemicon caps in it. But yeah, it's old, and like I say, some of them, especially some of these things, were, holy shit, yeah, they were burnt to a crisp. And this one was open. You actually stick that on a capacitor analyzer, it's open. Yeah, it's completely cooked. Luckily it didn't short out, or there would have been even more damage here. It probably would have wiped out. I'm assuming this has been replaced before. Like I say, it was on the top side of the board. So a matter of fact, this cap may have shorted at some point. Somebody just moved, put a new transistor in here. This thing shorted, it arced, and then went open. But it took out, the voltage regulator transistor in the process, and they didn't even think to replace that. But yeah, so it's back together and working now. So if main thing I wanted to show on this radio was, I think I might have done a video on one of these at some point in time. But the main thing on these, if you have problems, check these cables, because these have these coax cables have solid conductor, they're solid center conductors in these coax cables, so it doesn't take much to break them. But if they break and the two ends are still really close to each other, they could be touching, and it'll work 1 second, and you tap the radio, and it's just enough to break that contact, and the radio goes dead silent. You tap the radio again, and it starts working again. Check the coax cables. Easy to do there. You can just jiggle the cable once you've narrowed it down. But other thing is, it'd probably be a good idea if you have one of these, even if it's working fine. You don't have any problems with it. It can be in brand new condition. Hell, it can be brand new out of the box. I would suggest you move these two resistors from the bottom side of this board to the top side of the board. You'll save yourself some headache years down the road, especially if you leave radios on for extremely long periods of time. That way you don't cook this... Turn the volume down there. That way you don't cook this circuit board and do any circuit trace damage. Just a recommendation. It's not required, but yeah, it'd be a good idea to have these on top. Because like I say, you can see by the thermometer, they're sitting at 161 degrees right now, and that's on channel 19. If I go to channel 38, that's going to illuminate even more digits on this display, drawing even more load, and yeah, it's everything here should be on top. So that's the main reason I want to do this video. Display board power regulation system. Do yourself a favor, move the components, especially these resistors and this transistor, to the top side of the board. You'll thank yourself, years down the road. So there you go. There's a SBE Trinidad III back up and running and ready to be put back into service.